Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us for this session on EDI in the workplace. My name is Mary Miskin, and I am the Operations Director at Charlesworth Author Services, and I volunteer with the ISMTE in the European Conference Planning Committee. I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, our thanks go out to our sponsors, AGA, Atipon, Scholastica, American Chemical Society, Origin Reports, and Cabell's International. We're going to hold the questions until after the presenters have finished, but feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentations by using the Q&A field. This is right next to the chat functionality. If you do have a question for a specific speaker, then please use the @ sign before the presenter's name. You can also upvote questions from other attendees that you find interesting. So in the session today, we'll be hearing from 3 speakers, the first of whom is Nancy Roberts. Nancy is CEO of Umbrella Analytics. She has spent 20 years in publishing, working in operations for companies ranging from Penguin to Cambridge University Press, before leaving to specialise in ED&I. She is the founder of Umbrella, which uses machine learning to help businesses address workplace inequality using data. She is also head of technology and content at Maverick. She has a PhD in post-colonial feminist literary theory and an executive MBA from Cranfield University. Nancy will be talking about the importance of EDI policies in the workplace. Next, we'll hear from Katy Snell, who is head of people at Emerald Publishing. Katy has worked in the publishing industry for over 18 years. She is a senior HR leader with extensive strategic and operational experience in all aspects of HR. Katy is used to working in challenging and complex environments and leading businesses through significant change. She is a chartered member of the CIPD and has an MBA from Bradford School of Management. Katy will be talking about workplace EDI initiatives and policies at Emerald. Finally, we'll hear from Amanda Eastell-Bleakley, who is the Managing Editor for Ethnic and Racial Studies at the University of Surrey. Amanda is passionate about customer relationships and workflow efficiency. With over 20 years' experience overseeing the flow of academic papers around the globe, she specialises in themed issues and to date has led over 70 special issues into publication. Amanda also collaborates with the University EDI team to promote menopause awareness and support people affected by the menopause. Amanda will be talking about her work within this sphere. None of the speakers declare any conflicts relating to this presentation, and we can pass straight over to Nancy now for our first presentation. Thank you, Nancy.
Lovely, thanks, Mary. Just bear with me while I find my file again. Hopefully this is going to pop up for you now. Great, hoping you can see that now. So hi everyone, nice to see so many people on this session today. Welcome wherever you're joining from in the world. I'm joining from my bedroom, as you can see, because we've got the builders in, so excuse the mess behind me. So let me kick off. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I see in my work. So as Mary said in her intro, I come from a publishing background. I was always on the operations and production side. I spent about 9 years as operations director in academic publishing at Cambridge University Press. And I still have my feet in the publishing industry through my consultancy work. I also do management and leadership training, which to me is all wrapped up with the diversity and inclusion conversations, because a lot of what I see in companies is a lack of kind of management and leadership skills and training and development of those emotionally intelligent skills that we need to be good leaders, and particularly inclusive leaders. So that's a little bit about me. This is my brief agenda. I won't dwell on this. Let's just get into it. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is why I think EDI is important, and I hope that for many people on this session, that's kind of taken as read. You agree that it's important, but I think there's a couple of points I'd like to make around the business case for having an inclusive workplace, and I think some that are particularly relevant to the kind of scholarly communications sector that many of us work in. And these are the two on the left-hand side. So we know that diversity enables businesses to make quicker and better decisions. And I think if we think about the sort of scholarly comms industry, as I know it, it's often very homogenous, and it's often very, decisions don't go fully thought through because everybody agrees, because everybody comes from the same perspective, or they're made very slowly because everybody disagrees and we need to have an academic debate about every aspect of it. So I think that's an important thing for us to recognise. There are financial business reasons why diversity and inclusion is important, but it does also drive better decision making and better business. And we know also that diverse teams are able to innovate more. And that's kind of anecdotally seems obvious to me, that if you've got a variety of perspectives in the room, you're more likely to find a different range of solutions. And I think those are two bits that we don't talk enough about, actually, when we talk about the benefits of EDI. We'd all like our businesses to be sustainable and profitable. So obviously those financial metrics are useful as well, but there are other business benefits that emerge from this. So I guess the previous slide was the reason of why we should care about diversity and inclusion. This for me is the heart and why I do what I do. And this is around the moral case for diversity and inclusion. And what I really like about this quote, which is from the CIPD, of which Katy is a member, as you just heard, I like the fact that they emphasise that this is simply the right thing to do. And I think, again, that sometimes that can get lost in our thinking about these things, like why are we doing this and what should we focus on and how do we get this right? Remember at heart that we're doing this because it's the right thing for society. And, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not always know exactly what you're doing. Just remember that core moral purpose and you should be okay, I would say. And I would also emphasize what I've added at the bottom here, which is we need to focus on equality of outcomes. We can create equality of opportunities, but that does not mean everybody is equally able to take advantage of those opportunities. So I'm very interested in outcomes in my work, not just on how we level the playing field, but whether that actually changes the dimensions of the playing field altogether. I think we should also recognise that diversity and inclusion is increasingly important to employees. I mean, I've been working in this field for probably 5 years as a professional and more years than that as a volunteer, as I'm sure others in the session today have. And it used to be a bit of a hard sell. It used to be considered a nice to have. The evidence all suggests that employees increasingly see this as a must have in their organisations. And there's been a lot of talk about the Great Resignation off the back of COVID and how people are choosing differently about how they view their career. In a tight labour market, I think being committed to diversity and inclusion can be a real benefit in terms of competing for talent. So just a few trends which I've picked up on over the past sort of 3 to 6 months. It's a fast-moving field, diversity and inclusion, but these are some things which I've been talking a lot about and I've heard other people talking about. So I will firstly call out allyship, this notion that we should not expect underrepresented groups to solve diversity problems. So it's not up to women to solve the gender pay gap on their own. It's not up to people of colour to solve racial inequalities in their organisation. We need to all be allies in this situation. We all need to interrogate our own privilege and use it where we can to help those who have less. Increased focus on the importance of language. This is a real passion of mine, and we do a lot of work in helping companies to assess how inclusive their language is. A lot of my PhD is about this, and it's really understanding how to communicate with people in a way that resonates with them. So looking, of course, at things like job adverts, which I know Katy will touch on a little bit, but also other types of language. How do you talk about the organisation? How do you talk about your corporate values? All of these things will have impacts on the people you attract to your organisation, whether it's as employees or as colleagues or as partners or as people that you want to work with in the future. All recruitment will be expected to take account of diversity. Again, I think that's a big shift from 2 or 3 years ago, where people working really hard to diversify their recruitment were kind of, at the early stages. I think now employees expect there to at least be some thought around that. And as I said a little while ago, I think this focus on data, what's the outcome? What's the data about what you've done? So we've had a lot of years of training interventions and learning about bias and all of those things. And of course, all of those are important foundational things for us to all understand. But I think we really need to shift to saying, how does my organisation look? And what have I done to change that shape? What do the demographics look like? So looking at that outcome data, not just on we've put through 300 people through a training course. That's not really a metric that's valued anymore. And employees' expectations, as I said, are very different, I think, than even a few years ago, perhaps particularly after the pandemic. But I think what I would say about all the things on this slide is none of them are rocket science. What I think employees that I speak to really want is to be treated as an individual and as a human. So that means if they're going through a life crisis like miscarriage or divorce, having children, which is a huge life change, whatever they're going through, they expect their employer to at least acknowledge that that has an impact and talk to them as a human about it. And that flows right through to things like representation, not tokenism. I saw a spate a couple of years ago of many people trying to diversify the imagery on their websites, so that they had, it would appear that they had a very diverse workforce. Well, of course, you see through that as soon as you go into an office building. So it's this idea that we don't want tokenism. What we want is a diverse range of people in the organisation and a diverse range of role models. So, put your money where your mouth is. Don't just make it a PR exercise. I think that's become pretty much an expectation for everyone these days. So if you're thinking about starting on this journey, don't worry, many people haven't started on it. It's really important that diversity and inclusion is embraced from the top. Psychological safety in organisations starts with leaders. And if you don't have a courageous leader behind this agenda, you'll struggle to make it work throughout the organisation. In terms of the way that we look at organisations, we suggest looking at your people processes across the whole employee life cycle and picking a place where you can start. So that might be around looking at your recruitment and how can you diversify that. It might be about looking at your retention rates and whether particular people are more likely to leave the organisation. So pick an area of the employee life cycle and see what difference you can make there. Which, both as a practitioner and as a researcher come up a lot for me in terms of how to make diversity and inclusion real in an organisation and not just something on a sort of slide deck or a corporate values page of the website. So I think, as an industry looking at communications and looking at knowledge generation, we have to think about the diversity of our workforce, but also about the diversity of the kinds of knowledge that we generate and how people can access that. So the diversity of our outputs, if you like, as researchers and scholarly communicators. It's really important to have an EDI strategy that aligns with your goals as a business and makes sense in what you're trying to do as a business. If it's always a kind of separate thing, then it's going to be really hard to get traction. And the most critical thing for me is resourcing these efforts properly. Don't assume that everybody should just volunteer their time to make diversity and inclusion happen, because you don't expect them to volunteer their time to deliver IT projects and things like that. It takes people's time, and that should be recognised. And the best way to make this happen is to measure and monitor it, to set goals and to hold people accountable. There is no magic bullet. There is no, if you get this piece of software in, everything will be fine. It's really about making sure that people understand that this is as critical a part of the organisation as delivering their sales targets or commissioning the great content or whatever it is that is the work that they do. So that's it from me. I think I've got a tiny bit over time, so I'd better shut up and hand over to Katy, but my details are there if anyone would like to get in touch.
Thanks, Nancy. Let me just get my slides up. Okay. So Nancy obviously covered the importance of EDI, and what I want to share with you today is some of the things that we've been doing at Emerald, really to help us to create that inclusive culture. And it all really starts with our values, and Nancy's just talked about the importance of this, of EDI not being a separate thing, about it really being ingrained in what you do and what you believe in. And it's two of our values that drive us in this. So individuality, we really want to create that safe environment where people can be themselves. They can come to work, they've got nothing to hide, and they feel really comfortable in that environment. And then trust, we do this by creating this open and responsive culture. And that's about respecting people's differences. There are differences, and not everyone is comfortable with that. So how do we get people feeling that they can be, that they can talk about these things, and then there are no taboo subjects? So that really guides us in everything we do. And as Nancy said, we've kind of looked at it in the same way as she has, in terms of how can you start to break down where some of these practices are and where you can focus. So for us, that all starts with inclusive recruitment. An advert, that's the first step. That's where you put out there, that's where you signal your culture and how inclusive you are. And there's lots of research out there around how women are less likely to apply for roles if they've not got 100% of the criteria. There's lots of research around ethnic minorities, and again, how they will be put off adverts if it starts to talk about a personality trait rather than a behaviour. So for example, talking about you must be creative rather than you must be able to think creatively. Using words like assertive, independent, analytical are all words that do put females off applying for roles. So it's really thinking, how can you get that inclusive language? And we use a gender decoder. There are lots of these out there. I'm sure many of you probably use them. But that really scans your advert. It looks for those words that could be off-putting, and then it suggests things. So if you put driven by, it might suggest that you change that to inspired by. So kind of some really practical tips on how you can look at that advert and perhaps take out some of that more masculine language that may put some of the audience off. Also thinking then about where you do place the adverts. And so that's about getting that as wide as possible. So it's about thinking, have you got some underrepresented groups in your organisation? And for us, a couple of years ago, we had a look and thought, to be honest, disability is not one of the areas where we had many employees currently. So we partnered with a company called Even Break, and they're a specialist job site that advertise and target disabled candidates. And so I think it's really about getting that measure of your generalist job sites, but actually where can you target and use some of these more specialist ones to get those adverts out there and to that wider audience. I think also thinking about jargon, just going back to that advert piece, and actually if you're anything like Emerald, we use every acronym under the sun, and that can be really off-putting. So just think about that in adverts as well. So we've also moved to blind applications through our applicant tracking system. And this is something where it removes all that identification data. So gender, age, ethnicity. And this is something that actually is not easy. So we've battled with some of our managers around this who really want all that data. They want to see all that before they make a decision. But actually that's where that bias creeps in. So I think it's something where you need to do it, you need to try it, and you need to stand your ground it if you're having some pushback from managers, because it really does help to try and minimise that bias. We've also introduced shortlisting targets, and this is something that actually has taken us a while to do. And I think probably because of the fear that would we be able to do this and would we be able to hit those targets. So practically, we've started really low with these targets. It just puts them in place that we think we can meet. And then over time, hopefully we can adjust those and push ourselves a little bit more. But I think it is about trying something and just not being put off by the fear of that. We do initial telephone interviews. So that's a new step that we've introduced where we ask for cameras not to be put on. And again, that's to minimise trying to make that decision based on what somebody looks like, the colour of the skin. So helping to minimise some of that bias again. And then we've always done panel interviews at Emerald, always with a minimum of 2 people. But this is something that we're trying to widen. So we know, as Nancy said, that having more diverse people in the room really does help to lead to better decisions. It also signals how inclusive we are as a business and hopefully makes diverse candidates feel more comfortable. But again, that's not an easy one. Trying to get as many people involved as possible in the panels can be hard when people are busy. And so again, rather than saying, well, we can't do that because we've not got the time, we've kind of targeted where that would really benefit us more and started to do that. But hopefully if we can widen that out, that would be great. And then just thinking about, again, how you can widen that talent pool. So we use internships, we have a summer programme, and we encourage work experience. And this can come from a variety of places, whether that's schools, colleges, universities. But we found that that's really helped to kind of get people in who've then come back to us when they finish university or have stayed with us if they're a postgrad. So again, just thinking, again, where can you kind of widen this so that you get your advert out to as many people as possible and you've been as inclusive as possible. So like many other organisations, we've evolved our ways of working and obviously the pandemic's been a catalyst for this, but actually we were very flexible before that, and it's something that I've been pushing for a number of years at Emerald. I think, you know, we do need to be as inclusive as possible. We really want to support people who've got caring responsibilities, and they are the ones that often suffer if people aren't offering these opportunities. But I think we're also mindful of what that means in terms of flexible and remote working. And I think we all know how people can tend not to switch off. We can suffer more with burnout. So what we did was to create our flexible working commitments that you can see on the slide. You may not be able to read writing if it's too small. But this was about trying to understand what colleagues needed from us. So if this is to be successful, then what do they need from the organisation? But in return, what do we need from them? So we created these 8 commitments that are really around kind of giving permission. So permission to take breaks, to switch off, to work when suits you. So we have the flexible guidance we have is that you can work anywhere and any time, as long as there's no detriment to the business. So for a handful of roles, that might mean coming into the office slightly more, but for the majority, it's not. And we've left it to people to really to do that and to structure their day, to take their children to school, to go to the gym class in an afternoon. So as long as it's not having a detrimental impact on the business, they can do what they want to. But as I said, these commitments are about then making sure that actually we respect each other's time. If different people have different patterns, that we're not trying to kind of shoehorn everyone into those core hours, that we say no to meetings, for example. So does everyone really need to be in all those meetings all the time? So pushing back on that. We've introduced a no meeting zone. So between 12 and 2, all colleagues have a zone where we really do try to avoid meetings. Again, we're flexible, we're a global organisation, so sometimes this has to give a little, but it just gives people that time to either have lunch, to take a break, or to just kind of do some of that work that you need some focus and concentration for. So we've got lots of things in place there, and I think really key to this is role modelling, and our CEO Vicky has been great. For example, coming to yoga classes at lunchtime that we're putting on to try and give people breaks, and declining meetings that she doesn't think she needs to be in. So I think it's really key that you get your leaders involved in role modelling some of this behaviour. But I think we've heard that lots of organisations are now kind of doing a U-turn around flexible and remote working, but we've seen that it works. So we really kind of feel strongly that we want to continue this and make it work. And then just some of our other inclusive practices. So we're really pleased that actually since gender pay reporting came in, we have managed to reduce our gap from 24% down to 14% over the last 4 years. And that's a result of a number of things. So we've got some family-friendly policies that we've put in place, and enhanced leave and pay. We've got some better support in place for our parents and our carers. The recruitment practices that I have just talked through are all kind of new in the last year, 18 months. We started before the pandemic looking at apprenticeships, and that was again looking at where we got underrepresented groups. So how do we get more women into tech? How do we get more men into our publishing teams? And I know that's similar for a lot of publishing organisations out there. This is something we did put on hold with the pandemic, but we are going to be picking back up and looking at what we can do there. We partner with a lot of local universities, and we've been running some education days, which is actually reaching out to a wider audience, so kind of disadvantaged groups, mature students, people who might not necessarily have just come through the traditional routes. And again, we're seeing people then coming to days like that, then coming on our intern programme and then staying with us. And then we've introduced maternity, which is for long-term absence, whether that's maternity or sickness absence, and how do we kind of phase returns but back on full pay so that people have not got that pressure in their return. And then something that's been a real success is our Let's Talk About campaign, and we introduced this a couple of years ago. And this is where our colleagues are actually sharing their stories. Some of that has been a written format within our magazine, some have been video diaries. But actually it's around subjects such as anxiety, depression, miscarriage, bereavement, disability, so all kinds of subjects. But I think, as Nancy mentioned earlier, it's about how do we remove the stigma, how do we make it okay to talk about these things and to understand that that will impact on people's work, but we're here to support that. And I think it's been really great because what we found is that some of the people that have shared the stories have had other colleagues reach out to them to chat about it. We've had employees wanting to put support groups in place, and we've been able to kind of target and focus more resources around that. We've now got a menopause guidance policy in place as a result of this. So there's lots of good stuff going on there, but that's really been quite employee-led, which I think is great that not everything's coming from our people team. And then we've got a wellness programme in place with an EAP. We've got mental health first aiders trained across the business, and we have quarterly wellness days where we cover all sorts of subjects. We kind of have fitness classes, yoga classes, things around resilience and change. So lots of support and resources that are always available. And then, as Nancy said, I think it's about thinking about that resource. We've tried to build this into a number of roles. We've got lots of volunteers who it's not part of their role, but they want to get involved. But it does often get pushed down your to-do list if it's not your key priority. So we've actually just advertised for a 9-month secondment internally to dedicate a resource to this. And I'm hoping that actually within that 9 months, we'll be able to show the return on this and keep that as a permanent resource. And on this journey, we've worked with inclusive employers. I'm not sure if you've heard of those, but they are UK based, and actually they've partnered with us. They look at kind of reviewing some of your practices and auditing, recommending some changes, and really helping us to identify some of those gaps. So, you know, there are other organisations out there, obviously Nancy, and so it's good if, you know, if you are stuck on where to start, there are lots of resources out there to help you. We've signed the Time to Change pledge, and also we're just looking at signing the EMAS menopause and work charter. And then last year, we've been rewarded the Disability Confident Leader status, which is around our inclusive practices, and the Silver Mind Wellbeing Index. And that's been really great to see some of our achievements through those. And then in this past year, we were highly commended in the IPG Awards for the Diversity Award, and a winner at the Inside Out Awards for our wellbeing programme. And I know it may sound like I'm blowing our trumpet here, which I am, but I think what I just kind of wanted to say is that I'm really proud that we've been recognised for this, because it's not about tokenism and PR stunts. It is genuinely about a commitment and a real desire to make this work and to make it an inclusive workplace. And I'm not saying we get it right all of the time and that it's easy. As I said, we have pushback from managers on things. We don't always make the right decisions, but it's about just starting somewhere and trying some of these things, and you can build on that. So just that's my experiences, and I'm going to hand over to Amanda now.
Thanks, Katy. I think Emerald Publishing sounds like a really great place to work. I'm sure all the audience would agree with me. So I'm the managing editor for the Journal of Ethnic and Racial Studies, which is based at the University of Surrey, where I've joined forces with the EDI team to help people with their menopause experience. My own menopause experience began 3 years ago with a hysterectomy, and since then I've been dismayed by the lack of menopause awareness in and out of the workplace. In this presentation, I'll be sharing with you why I believe EDI policies should include the menopause, and some thoughts as to how we can assist colleagues, friends and family, and how to equip managers with the tools to show appropriate understanding and support. There are 3 main themes for my talk today. I'd like to start with a brief overview of the menopause. Secondly, the relevance of menopause in the workplace, and finishing with how we might provide assistance in a workplace context. 100 years ago, women's life expectancy was 59 years, and the average age of menopause was 57. Fast forward to today, in the UK, the average menopause age is 51, and a woman's life expectancy is 83, with 1 in 6 women living to 100 years or more. Women will therefore spend a significant portion of their lives in menopause and in work. Technically, menopause is a one-day event referring to 12 months and 1 day after your last period. In reality, the term menopause refers to the transition starting in early 40s with the perimenopause, when women's hormone balance starts to change, and leading to postmenopause, which lasts for the rest of a woman's life. Symptoms can be experienced at any point. From perimenopause onwards, hormone levels begin to fluctuate, resulting in a huge array of potential symptoms, both physical and psychological. In fact, estrogen is involved in 300 bodily functions, so it's no wonder that women can experience disruption in anything from sleep, low mood, joint pain, breathlessness, and of course hot flushes and night sweats. The severity and duration of symptoms varies tremendously from woman to woman. For many, this is not a natural process. It can be surgically induced via hysterectomy or cancer treatment, and 1 in 100 reach menopause before the age of 40, some as early as their teens. Menopause symptoms are commonly misdiagnosed as depression. Newson's Health Survey of nearly 3,000 women found 66% were wrongly offered antidepressants for their menopause symptoms. Men can also experience symptoms of age-related hormone changes called andropause or male menopause, which is when testosterone levels decline. This tends to be a gentler process, but can still cause challenging physical and psychological symptoms. Just as everyone's menopause is different, so is their personal choice about how to manage symptoms and long-term health. Some prefer a natural approach, others a medical approach, such as hormone replacement therapy, HRT, or for some it can be a combination of two, in addition to lifestyle changes and self-care. Whatever one's preference, professional help should be sought, and early treatment is advisable before symptoms feel really desperate. When women understand their symptoms and discover ways to manage them, their lives and their work can quickly improve. The impact of living with someone who is not sleeping or having to battle with brain fog, for example, can also have a significant effect. So whether you're female, male, non-binary, experiencing the menopause yourself or in a supporting role, understanding the menopause is fundamental. This is ever more relevant in today's society, as women of menopause age are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace and have been since 1993. It's estimated that 13 million women in the UK are currently in menopause. 90% will get menopause symptoms, and 10% of women leave their jobs as a result of the menopause. With fewer new entrants from education joining the workforce, organisations need to look after their older workers to have the talent they need to run their businesses. Thus far, there is little formal evidence about the menopause effects in the workplace, but findings in the Menopause at Work survey evidenced a lack of support being available. We know there is a negative perception of the menopause surrounded by embarrassment, stigma, and a general lack of awareness, including by women and health professionals. Women often attribute their symptoms to stresses of work and home, which may be true but not necessarily the full picture. Many line managers tell us they don't feel confident talking about menopause. They don't know enough about it or how they can help. Unlike maternity, where it's usually clear, a woman gets pregnant, has antenatal appointments, hands in her MAP B1 form, goes on maternity leave and returns to work after a period of leave, there is little in place for the menopause transition. As responsible employers, having appropriate support in place for women's well-being during this transition makes good business sense. It's vital that staff are able to stay well and thrive in the workplace, and employers cannot afford to lose the rich experience and talent that women bring. So we can see now that there is a business imperative and moral responsibility to acknowledge the menopause, but there is also a legal responsibility. The 2010 Equality Act protects against age, sex, and disability discrimination. On its own, the menopause does not get automatic protection from discrimination, but its symptoms, for some, mean that they will be legally classed as disabled and therefore protected. Indeed, there have been 4 successful tribunals brought against employers under this Act in relation to menopause. The concern over discrimination has been highlighted in a 2017 government report, and more recently, the Women and Equality Committee have set up a parliamentary inquiry on why workplaces are failing women going through menopause. So the law is catching up. Dr. Andrea Davis, co-author of the government report on menopause, states, "Menopause and work, it's a two-way street. Work is good for menopausal women. It contributes far more than just a salary. It can provide fulfillment, self-esteem, and identity. But working environments like those with lack of temperature control, cramped conditions, some uniforms, and stress can also make menopause symptoms worse." So how do we create a culture where the menopause is no longer taboo, where women are supported and can thrive, and where employers can protect themselves against tribunals? Firstly, by introducing a menopause policy or guidance, informing the whole staff community of how to learn about the menopause transition. With my EDI colleagues, we've created a guidance pack which we are launching this month. In conjunction, we have produced a comprehensive toolkit detailing how women might seek professional help and how line managers can provide practical support. The University of Sheffield have gone one step further. They've launched a personalised menopause support app for employees and partners, giving access to information and medical practitioners. We also need consideration of reasonable adjustments in the workplace. These could include temperature control, such as desk fans or being able to sit near a window, flexible working arrangements for those with sleep disruption, access to wellbeing services to help with psychological symptoms, and offering spare uniform where relevant. Anecdotally, I recently heard of a fire brigade reviewing their uniforms to make the fabric comfortable for menopause women to make them comfortable for menopause women and thus improve their staff retention. Increasing awareness and encouraging open conversations and providing help can transform lives both professionally and personally. This could be signposting resources on an organisation's intranet, having menopause champions in place who can offer assistance, or providing training for line managers. At my university, we've been running monthly menopause cafes virtually for the past 8 months and hopefully in person from next week with cake. It's a small start, but we've been overwhelmed and humbled by women's reactions. Additionally, we're planning a series of lunch and learn sessions where we invite expert guest speakers to discuss different aspects of the menopause experience, such as help for partners, appropriate exercise, nutrition, and different forms of treatment. In summary, making menopause an inclusive subject that no one is afraid or embarrassed to talk about helps make your organisation a great place to work, giving employees the confidence to ask for help and support if they need it. There are a couple of useful resources on the screen. I've got loads more, so if you'd like to discuss any aspect of my presentation today, do get in contact with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Okay, I'll just pin all of the speakers to the front so we can see everyone. So if anybody does have any questions for the panel, please do feel free to go ahead and post them in the Q&A. There aren't any there at the moment, but I've got some questions that I thought as I've been listening to your presentations. So Amanda and Katy, I'd be quite interested to hear, linking to Nancy's point about allyship, and both of you, Katy, you referenced menopause within the workplace, that Emerald is looking at signing up to, I think, some kind of policy on that. But to what extent have you both managed to bring men into those conversations? Amanda, you talked about the menopause cafes. Is it a conversation you're managing to have across all genders? And are we seeing that kind of allyship within this discussion on menopause?
We're at an incredibly early stage, and no, Mary, we're not managing to get men along to our cafes, but it's been a tricky time with being online, and we're hoping with the in-person cafes that more men will be encouraged to come. But what we're really hoping to do is to train up men throughout the university to be advocates, menopause advocates. So we've got a small group of 6 at the moment, but we've got a couple of guys who've expressed interest in joining us, and we feel that that's going to really help open up the conversation across all genders.
Yeah, and I would echo that really. We've not got many men in this discussion. Emerald, a few of them. So actually, I don't know if people may have come across this, but as part of our company Emerald Works, as part of the Emerald Group, they do a podcast, and actually menopause was the subject on there, and it was 2 of our colleagues who did the podcast. And actually what we saw internally then on our Teams and Slack channels was a great deal of support, and actually, you know, that's something we want to take forward. So I mean, again, there were men on that and kind of saying the right things, but actually nothing more than that. So it's how could we get those people then involved in And menopause is the area where actually we might have an employee-led group being set up quite soon on that. So I think if we could get those men contributing to that, that would be ideal. But yeah, it's not easy at all.
Thanks, Katy and Amanda. We've also had a comment in the chat from Christine saying that we need to include menopause education in sex education courses to start with the education early on in life. And then, Nancy, you talked about the importance of inclusive language across a business. And then Katy mentioned how they're using a model gender decoder within recruitment adverts. Are there other sort of tools that businesses can use to help them to be more inclusive in their language?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of organisations have started with looking at job adverts, and the reasons for that, I think, are twofold. One is that it's a very A/B testing kind of world, a job ad. So I could put a job ad out today and put a different one out tomorrow and see what response I get. And obviously, in many parts of our people processes, you can't do that, right? So it lends itself to research. So there's lots of good research about how you can write more inclusive job adverts, and that's led to development with these tools. And as Katy said, we have one. There are others out there. Textio provides some of these services. There's lots of them around. That comes from a place of really good research. In the rest of the kind of communication chain, the research is harder to come by. But what we're finding is that increasingly organisations are saying we want this to flow through. So we're really happy that our recruitment advertising is attracting more diverse candidates, that we've got the language right, and we're presenting ourselves as an inclusive organisation right from the get-go. But what happens when those people come in the door and get the staff handbook, for example, or whatever the policies might be that you give people on induction? So we're starting to look at what's the evidence that's out there about what we can do about that, and it's much more early doors. But there are lots of ways we can make all types of communication more inclusive. So we're helping companies look at readability. If you take the average sort of policy that's been written by an in-house legal team, the average reading age for that will be at least graduate, if not postgraduate level. How many people in your organization are postgraduate level readers? We might be an unusual sector in many ways because they're probably more than average. But even so, that's still pitching at a very high level. And if that's what you're expecting people to rely on if they come to needing to raise a grievance or wanting to understand their responsibilities in terms of their management or health and safety or whatever it might be, we need to be more inclusive about that. We need to think about how we communicate with people with dyslexia, people with color blindness, or there's lots and lots of ways that we don't think about accessibility and inclusion in the way that we present ourselves as organizations. And I think something as simple as looking at the reading age of your documents and the reading time. If it takes 83 minutes to read, how many of your employees have read it? My money's on one maximum, and that's probably someone in the legal team. The other thing that's very easy to do is try to move away from legalese where you don't need it. And it's a little bit like what Katy was saying about jargon. We get very wedded to certain ways of talking in organizations about things. And what I see in a lot of policies is the employer will provide a desk and a chair. The employee will appropriately use said desk and said chair. And, that's not the way anyone speaks, right? To be inclusive, you want to be able to say, a little bit like Katy was talking about with the flexible working policies and commitments, seeing that more as a mutual commitment to say, we as people who care about you will provide you with the facilities you need to do your job, and we'll make sure that you've got the resources around you. You as an employee, we really like you to contribute this, and if either side doesn't live up to that bargain, there's a conversation to be had. And I think that these are ways that I can see things going. So we're working on tools around this, but it takes time to build the data about what's really going to work.
Thanks, Nancy. And we've just probably got time quickly for one question that has come in on the Q&A, which is linked to data. So Christine has asked, we are stuck on what demographic data to collect, since we take care on a responsibility for protecting the privacy of that information. And I worry about the safety of individuals in oppressive countries. Any thoughts on navigating the options?
Shall I take a start on that? I'll be very brief. It is an issue. You need to make sure you've got data security in place, which respects the privacy of the kind of information you're collecting. That said, that shouldn't prevent you from trying to collect more data. There's lots of good resources out there on how you can protect that data and what kind of protections people need. It's probably a bigger question that we can answer it in these few minutes, but I'd be happy to take it offline if anyone wants more. Katie, I don't know, or Amanda, whether you've got anything to add on that.
I think the only thing I'd just add is just to think about what data you want and why. I mean, there's a lot of data you could collect, but really think about what you'll use and what you'll use it for, because you do struggle. We struggle to get data. We've communicated in so many different ways about why we're collecting it and what we're using it for, but not everyone wants to give it. So I think, yeah, just be really clear about what you do need and just to collect that data.
Okay, great. Well, we are out of time. So just to say a massive thank you to all three of our speakers, Katy, Amanda and Nancy. It's been a really informative, illustrative discussion. Thank you. The next session today is at 4:30 BST. That is a historical perspective of diversity with Margaret Crosby Arnold. So please do join us there, and thank you everyone for your time.